Hello, I'm Farah. Welcome back. Part 1 of the series covered the basics of Viper. These basics will help you progress through the more casual areas of the game, like the MSQ, roulettes, maps, or etc. But once you start venturing into the more difficult areas of the game, like Extreme Trials, Savage, and Ultimate Rating, you'll need to have a better performance in order to clear the fights. With Viper being a selfish DPS, this becomes even more important. In this video, we will talk about optimizing our rotation and using our job resources effectively in order to increase our overall output. If you prefer a written guide to follow along with, I will leave a link to a document from the balance in the description. This guide assumes you know the basics of Viper. If you're unsure, click here to watch my previous video that covers everything you'll need to know. Before we begin, note that Viper is still in development. Everything is subject to change, especially potencies, so I won't dive too much into min-maxing numbers at this point. I don't expect the job to fundamentally change from what we have now, so today we'll focus on optimizing gameplay with the numbers that we do have. As DPS, our most important job lies within our burst windows. Endwalkers standardize these burst windows to every 2 minutes, and this will continue in Dawntrail. In my job trailer analysis video, I mentioned that raid buffs might be increased to 20 seconds, and I was right. From what I can see, every raid buff has been standardized to 20 seconds, even Summoner's raid buff coming down from 30 seconds. Our job is to fit as much potency into this 20-second window every 2 minutes. Viper's highest potency comes from our Reawaken combo, totaling at 5,000 potency. In a full uptime scenario, we generate enough offerings to use 3 Reawakens every 2 minutes. Our goal then is to incorporate 2 of those 3 Reawakens inside raid buff windows in order to maximize that damage. If you've ever played Reaper, this concept is similar to Double and Shroud. At 0 skill speed, a full RA combo from start to finish takes 11.22 seconds. With recast timers in mind, 2 RAs back to back will take 22.44 seconds with no drift. This means that we can't fit 2 full RAs in this window, but we can fit 1 full one and most of another, which is still a sizable gain. Therefore, our standard 2-minute burst windows will consist of 2 Reawakens. Now, in order for this to happen, we need to do a little bit of prep work. Following the general priority introduced in the basic guide, we need to make sure that neither Noxious Nash or our buffs will drop during the burst window. Since double RA takes 22.44 seconds, if our debuffs or either of our buffs have less time remaining than this timer, then they will drop, and that needs to be avoided. While not the only way to avoid this, the easiest way is to start 2 dual-wield combos before our burst window. To time these combos properly, watch your Serpent's Ire's cooldown. At around 15 seconds remaining on the timer, start the first dual-wield combo. After the first combo, start another dual-wield combo, but start on Dreadfangs. After this combo, follow the following sequence. Dreadfangs, our buff GCD, weave Serpent's Ire, use our finisher and Death Rattle, then double Reawaken. This setup will ensure that neither of your buffs or Nash will fall off during this locked window. There are other ways to set this up utilizing your other resources like Dreadwinder and Uncoiled Fury, but this will change timings drastically since both of those abilities come with differing recast timers, and run the risk of pushing RA abilities outside of raid buffs. If you choose to do this, it would be wise to spreadsheet it beforehand. The main thing for setting up the double RA window is the single dual wield GCD after pressing Serpent's Ire off cooldown. This will delay RA by 1 GCD in order for it to line up with raid buffs better, assuming they are also being pressed off cooldown. Now let's talk about our twin blade charges and rattling coil usage. The general priority says that we should aim to use Dreadwinder off cooldown and spend the rattling coils it generates immediately after. While this works, there are better ways to utilize these resources. With Dreadwinder being on a charge system, we can choose how, when, and where to spend these charges anytime after the opener. The only rule with this is that you must not overcap the charges if you can help it. This means the cooldown spinner on this ability should always be spinning. One of the main aspects of Dreadwinder is that it applies Noxious Gnash like Dreadfangs. The difference is that Dreadwinder and the two combo abilities it procs net more potency than a standard Dreadfangs combo. Therefore, in most situations, if you need to reapply Gnash and have a charge available, it will be a gain to use Dreadwinder to apply the debuff instead. If you're doing this shortly before a 2-minute burst window though, be careful, since it will affect your timings with a longer recast timer, and you will need to adjust your rotation accordingly. The longer recast timer between these GCDs can also make brief periods of downtime a lot easier to manage. Active downtime is referring to any time we have to move out of melee range when the boss is still targetable for whatever reason. The first step to improving as a melee player is navigating and limiting these windows. The longer recast timers of the Twin Blade make this feat much easier to accomplish since we have more time in between to dodge. The same can be said about Uncoiled Fury, but this ability is a bit more versatile since it can be used from range. This ability also has a long recast timer, so it can be used in quick bursts of downtime to dodge a mechanic as well if you don't have or want to use a Dreadwinder charge. The main thing to remember is to not overcap these, as each Rattling Coil lost is 900 potency lost. The last tool we have for navigating disconnects is Slither. Like Monk's Thunderclap, we can use this on a targeted ally to quickly dash across the arena and dodge mechanics. But be mindful with this. Slither takes up an off-global slot. Hunters, Swift, and Uncoiled Fury have their own mandatory OGCDs that will end up in a larger loss if you drop them or clip them. Slither's use will change depending on a lot of variables, so it will be a fight-to-fight basis. But I foresee the top Vipers utilizing this ability to squeeze out slightly more damage. Now for true downtime, or when the boss is untargetable, we need to do some prep work in order to not lose any potential damage. This prep will be on a fight-to-fight basis and should be spreadsheeted where possible. That being said, we can follow some general rules when approaching these situations. First, don't waste any potential potency on extending Noxious Gnash into downtime. It'll do nothing. Second, spend Dreadwinder stacks beforehand to make sure you don't overcap during downtime. If the downtime is less than 40 seconds, make sure you have one stack to use after it ends. Third, spend the necessary amount of Rattling Coils beforehand if you plan on using a Dreadwinder or Serpent's Ire immediately after. And lastly, if raid buffs are used immediately after downtime, make sure you have enough offerings beforehand to properly double Reawaken. Now, these scenarios occur frequently in Ultimate fights, but they also sometimes appear during Savage and Extreme trials as well. So keeping this in mind will definitely be useful across all areas of the game. The next thing I want to talk about in this video is Positional Alignment. In the basic guide, I stressed the follow the glowy lines mechanic, but sometimes we're presented with multiple glowing lines and have to choose. As we know, each of our 4 finishers are tied to a positional. The first time we start a dual wield combo, either after the opener or after 30 seconds of downtime, we get to choose which finisher we want to use. Since the finishers are tied to a specific buffing GCD, we really only have to decide which positional we want to start with. This decision is more important than you think because it will dictate the flow of your positional alignment for the rest of the fight. Like Reaper's Gibbet and Gallows, if we start on one positional, then each time we complete a dual wield combo, we will end on the other positional. Starting on flank means we will alternate flank to rear, and vice versa if we start on hind. During the course of a fight, we sometimes find that navigating through a set of mechanics and hitting positionals at a given time is easier depending on which positional we have to hit. Sure, you can just press true north and ignore it, but you often find yourselves needing to hit positionals, and true north is always down when you need it. If you have the opportunity to make your life easier just by swapping the starting order of your finishers, then you absolutely should for your sake. And sometimes for the sake of your group, if you have a habit of causing wipes by greeting positionals. The same is true for your Twin Blade combos. Hunter's Coil and Swiftskin Coil are tied to the flank and rear positionals respectively. You can choose which one to use first in order to hit these positionals easier. And since it doesn't break combos, Viper can also use Uncoiled Fury to manipulate positional timings. We can use Uncoiled Fury to delay the use of our finisher or whatever positional we're trying to hit until a point where we can hit it. It's also important to note too that Reawaken also doesn't break combos, so you may even find yourself able to use the odd minute Reawaken to delay a finisher or a twin blade combo action. The last thing I want to talk about is Viper's resource generation and how it'll affect extended fights. Viper is a resource positive job, meaning that we generate more offerings than we need to spend on Reawaken, even at 0 skill speed. We start with extra gauge from our opener and gain 10 gauge every 2 minutes. This means that between the 6-minute and 8-minute burst, we have an extra RA to spend during the odd minute. This changes our rotation slightly at this point. Now, normally, we spend 4 rattling coils in between burst windows so we don't overcap, but because we're using an extra RA around the 7-minute mark, that means we don't generate as much offerings. Therefore, in order to have enough gauge for the 8-minute burst, we only spend 2 rattling coils instead of 4. This means, if done properly, you will be capped at 3 rattling coils after pressing your 8th minute Serpent's Ire. So if you just make sure you're at 2 coils before your 8-minute burst and not overcapping your Dreadwinders, then you're fine. Now after this, the rotation continues as normal, as the next time this will happen is at a time where no full uptime fight has ever gone before. Over the course of a fight, we have a lot of resources to keep track of and use effectively. Outside of our opener and double Reawaken bursts, we can use these resources whenever we see fit and will likely change between each fight. As long as we avoid overcapping resources, avoid dropping our buffs and debuffs, including the combo finisher buffs, then where we use what and when doesn't matter. It'll be up to you to figure out what works best at the time and what works best with your group strategies. That's all I have for the intermediate guide. Thanks for watching. And if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. What we discussed here will likely be the overall function of the job for high-end raiding. The next and final video of this series will be the advanced guide for Viper, and this will cover GCD timing manipulation, irregular burst sequences, advanced gauge management, and spreadsheeting basics. If that's something that interests you, consider hitting subscribe. I have a lot more in store for you guys, and I look forward to Dawntrail to put all of this into practice. Speaking of, I'll be going live on Twitch for Dawntrail's early release. Come hang out and level with me. Until next time.